Good evening. Being a poli-sci major, you might be able to say I like boring things. So today we're going to go along with that theme, and we're going to talk about the vastly entertaining infrastructure and how it is crumbling in this nation. Now, we're going to cover the three topics of how did we get infrastructure in place, what exactly is it, and what can you do to help stop the dilapidation and crumbling of our infrastructure. Now, how did it come about? In the 1930s, our country was in a Great Depression. You might have heard your grandparents talk about it, or your great-grandparents. They probably lived through it and have some great stories to tell. But the reality of the truth is, it was not a great time for our nation. Jobs were lost left and right, and people were going hungry. So we decided to kick Herbert Hoover out of office, and we elected FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now, part of his campaign platform was this revolutionary idea of the New Deal, of expanding government and bureaucracy. People don't normally like that, but in desperate times calls for desperate measures, correct? So through that, in his first 100 days of office, he created many government agencies. They even cleverly in the media nicknamed it the alphabet soup, because many of the agencies held names such as the AAA, the CCC. The CCC built a lot of our state parks. And all these agencies, what were they doing? They were building. Because you have a large group of people who are, more or less, they don't share the same skills. So, build. They were building roads and highways and interstates and dams and parks and schools. They were building. Now, this program lasted all the way up to the 50s. We luckily got out of the Great Depression after World War II. We were lucky in that most of our infrastructure, actually all of it, just about was never touched in the Great War. Europe was. This helped us to get far ahead above Europe and all those other countries who actually had to fight World War II on their own home territory. But what happens whenever you build for such a long period of time and you build so much? You stop. And after you stop, if you're not maintaining it, not actively helping to innovate and to repair, it's going to become dilapidated. And I'm afraid, folks, that's where we are today. The dilapidation of our infrastructure. Infrastructure is all around us. According to politics and policy in states and communities, infrastructure is the physical infrastructure which includes roads, transportation systems, housing, and community development projects. Infrastructure encompasses so much. If you think about it, theoretically, if you're going to go on a trip to Shreveport and you live in Monroe, what are you going to use? You're going to use a car, but you're also going to use a road. And that road is going to lead you to Shreveport. If you didn't have those government roads, you would either be walking or your car would get stuck in the mud a lot. If you're going to take a shower or wash a bowl of fruit, you're going to use water. That's also infrastructure. Many of you went to public school. Those buildings, most of them, were part of that infrastructure that was built in the 1950s and 60s and 40s and 30s, and as many of you can probably attest, they were crumbling at some degree. Now, according to U.S. News, our infrastructure is absolutely bad. Just how bad, you ask? The American Society of Civil Engineers. Well, they most recently gave America's roadways a D+ rating. Now, this also includes our citing developmental roadways, insufficient waterways, and a pressing need to modernize. A prime example would be Flint, Michigan. Their water crisis. Modernization did not happen there. Lead got into the pipes through a dilapidated water system. Theoretically, they were going to use it to have money shortfalls and to save a little bit of money. That didn't happen, and that hurt people. And that is due to crumbling infrastructure. Not enough money going into modernization, renovation, and replacing old, outdated equipment. So, now that you know just how bad it is and how it roots came into America, what can you do about bettering our essential infrastructure? I'm glad you asked. Infrastructure is a big deal in many of your elected officials' agendas, and they want to hear from you. Oftentimes they don't, especially from our demographic of that 18 to 25-year-old range. They want to hear from you. You can call them, look up their numbers. They'll listen to you, and they'll vote the way that you ask them to vote because they answer to you ultimately. Another way is voting. Register to vote, and not only vote in your local elections, but also your national elections. Because ultimately, voting at any level will affect you. So, the two candidates, we have Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. This is a surprising fact. They actually agree on something. I know, right? They agree that we need to better our infrastructure. Now, of course, they have different ideas of how to do so. That's understandable. They don't agree on much. So, let's see. Donald Trump, according to U.S. News, he has repeatedly spoken out in favor of investing federal money into the betterment of our domestic construction and rebuilding projects to get the country's roadways and economic systems back on track. Fair enough. Hillary Clinton, according to the New York Times, she has a plan to increase federal investments in infrastructure and is, as they state, a particularly good idea. This plan has been approved by most economists and labor unions and even the Chamber of Commerce. So again, it all depends on who you prefer to vote for. But ultimately, vote, because they both want infrastructure to better. I'll leave you with this final thought. We have gone through the conception of infrastructure as it is today. We've also gone through the topic of why it is not working today. We do not have enough money siphoned off to better replace and modernize our infrastructure, our roadways, our waterways, and our schools. According to a New York Times op-ed piece, it is not just about roads and bridges, although they are important. It is also about schools and the electrical grid and environmental and technological innovation. All of these things are needed. All of them are important to our daily lives, and we cannot continue to push them off into the back of our minds and not think about them anymore. Because the more we do that, the more it hurts us in the future and our children and their children and the nation as a whole. Thank you.